Wel- Welcome, class, and Bible, the major prophets. I want to say thank you guys for this time. And I want to say thank you guys for enduring this season and this season and this class. It's come to an end, but obviously your Bible education has not come to an end yet. We still got a couple more semesters to go. And I want to say thank you guys for sticking out. And I want to be able to introduce myself. Obviously, this is not the end of the road, but this is just a chapter being closed in your walk. So we're Daniel. We're going over the book of Daniel. We're good. It's 12 chapters, but it's very condensed. We'll not be able to cover everything in detail, but we're going to do a slight overview for everything. And I definitely want to agree that you see now from the beginning how it compares to there with Isaiah and Jeremiah and Ezekiel and Lamentations, how it's connected, and hopefully you'll be able to see this as a work that's continuing on. There you go. So right here. So I'm gonna put in this video here about the Bible Hub because it explains it so well, and then us the spoken word here. But we're gonna go Bible Hub, just get an overview over the book of Daniel. All right, guys. Thank you.
The Book of Daniel. The story is set right after Babylon's first attack on Jerusalem, and they had plundered the city and its temple and taken a wave of Israelites into exile. Among them were four. The Book of Daniel. The story is set right after Babylon's first attack on Jerusalem, and they had plundered the city and its temple and taken a wave of Israelites into exile. Among them were four men from the royal family of David: Daniel, who's later named Belteshazzar, and his three friends, who you probably know by their Babylonian names: Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. This book tells of their struggles to maintain hope in the land of their conquerors. The book's design seems pretty simple at first. Chapters 1 through 6 contain stories about Daniel and his friends in Babylon, while chapters 7 through 12 contain the visions of Daniel about the future. But this two-part shape is made even more interesting by another design feature, and that's the book's language. It begins in Hebrew, the language of the Israelites, but chapters 2 through 7 are written in Aramaic, a cousin language to Hebrew spoken widely among the ancient empires. But then in chapters 8 through 12, it goes back to Hebrew. This design shows how chapters 2 through 7 are a coherent section, but it also highlights the importance of chapters 2 and 7 for understanding the later chapters of the book. Let's just dive in. Chapter 1 introduces the basic tension of the first half of the book. Daniel and his friends, they're really wise and capable, and they're recruited to serve in the royal palace of Babylon. But they're pressured to give up their Jewish identity by living and eating like Babylonians and violating the Jewish food laws found in the Torah. So they refuse, and they choose faithfulness to the Torah, and that puts them in danger. But God delivers them, and they end up being elevated by the king of Babylon. After this begins the Aramaic section, which you'll see has this really cool symmetrical design. So first, the king of Babylon has a dream that, it turns out, only Daniel is able to interpret. It's about a huge statue made of 4 types of metal, and it symbolizes a sequence of kingdoms, and the head is Babylon. But then a huge rock comes flying in, and it shatters the statue, and it becomes this huge mountain. Now, this dream is the first of many symbolic visions in the book, and this one introduces the basic storyline of them all. Daniel says that the statue represents a train of human kingdoms following from Babylon, and they will all fill God's world with violence. But one day, God's kingdom will come and will confront and humble the arrogant kingdoms of this world and fill the world with the healing justice of God's reign and rule. After this, chapter 3 tells the famous story of Daniel's 3 friends who refuse to bow down and worship a huge idol statue, which, like the statue in chapter 2, represents the king and his imperial power. And so the friends are persecuted. They're thrown into a fiery furnace, but God delivers them from death, and they're exalted by the king, who now acknowledges their God as the true one. After this come a pair of stories about 2 Babylonian kings, the father, Nebuchadnezzar, and then his son, Belshazzar. They're both filled with pride because of their imperial power. And so, like in chapter 2, God warns them both through dreams and then visions, which, also like chapter 2, only Daniel can interpret. He says that both kings are to humble themselves before God, and both kings arrogantly resist. So Nebuchadnezzar is stricken with madness. He becomes like a beast in the field. But then he humbles himself before God, and his humanity returns to him. He's restored as king. This is in contrast with his son, Belshazzar, who doesn't humble himself before God, and he's assassinated that very night. Now, these two stories draw this imagery from Genesis chapters 1 and 2 and Psalm 8, where humans are depicted as the royal image of God. He's given them authority to rule over the beasts of the field and the birds of the air on behalf of God, who is the world's true king. But when human kingdoms forget that, when they rebel and make themselves and their power into a god, they become less than human, like violent beasts who will face God's justice. Which brings us to chapter 6, the pair of chapter 3. And this time it's Daniel who's being persecuted because he refuses to pray and worship the king as a god. And so, like the friends, he's sentenced to death and he's thrown into a lion's den. But God delivers him from the beasts, and like the friends, the king exalts Daniel and praises his God, which brings us to chapter 7. It's the pair of chapter 2 and the center of the book where all its themes come together. It's another dream, but it's Daniel's this time. And ironically, he can't understand the dream until an angelic messenger explains it to him. He sees a series of 4 beasts, one like a lion, then like a bear, then one like a winged leopard, each of these symbolizing an arrogant kingdom. And last of all is a super beast, identified as a really evil empire. And it has lots of horns, a common symbol for kings in the Old Testament. And there's one specific horn who is an image of an arrogant king who exalts himself above God and persecutes God's people. Now, they are symbolized by a figure called the Son of Man, who's an image for both God's covenant people, but also for their king from the line of David. But then all of a sudden, God, who's called the Ancient of Days, comes and he sets up his throne. He destroys the super beast and he exalts the Son of Man on the clouds, where he comes up to sit at God's right hand and share in God's rule over the nations. We can look back now and see how all of these stories in the first half fit together. The 3 stories of faithfulness despite persecution. These are meant to offer hope to God's suffering people among the nations. But they suffer because human kingdoms have rebelled against God and have become beasts. And so these visions encourage patience, that God's people are to wait for him to bring his kingdom and rule over our world and vindicate his suffering people. But it raises the question about when God is going to do that, and that's what these final 3 visions set out to explore. In chapter 8, Daniel has another vision about the final 2 beasts of chapter 7, but this time they're symbolized by a ram, who we're told is an image of the empire of the Medes and Persians, and then by a goat, who's an image of ancient Greece. And out of the goat come a whole bunch of horns, one of which symbolizes the evil king from chapter 7. And we're told more about him, that he will attack Jerusalem and exalt himself above God and defile the temple with idols. However, in the end, he will be destroyed by God, who will exalt his people and his kingdom. Now, by chapter 9, Daniel is very puzzled, especially as to when all of this is going to take place. And so he consults the scroll of the prophet Jeremiah, where God said that Israel's exile would only last 70 years. So for Daniel, the 70 years is almost up. And so he asks God to fulfill his promise soon. But an angel comes and informs him that Israel's sin and rebellion has continued. And so their time of exile and oppression will continue on 7 times longer than Jeremiah envisioned. Daniel is deeply disturbed by this, and he has one final vision. We're shown the same sequence of kingdoms. It's Persia, then Greece, and Alexander the Great, followed by lesser kings, all leading up to this final king of the north, who will invade Jerusalem, set up idols in the temple, and exalt himself above God. But then, all of a sudden, this king comes to ruin. Now, there's been endless debate about what all of these visions refer to. Many see a clear connection to the exploits of the Syrian king Antiochus in the 160s BC. He killed many faithful Jews in Jerusalem and set up idols in the temple. Others think it points forward to the Roman Empire's role in the execution of Jesus and the destruction of Jerusalem and the temple in AD 70. And still others think it will be fulfilled in future events that have yet to happen when Jesus will return. Now, the problem is that the symbols and the numbers, they don't quite match any of these views perfectly. But it opens up the possibility that, in a sense, they are all right. The book of Daniel has been designed to offer hope to all future generations of God's people. It did so in the days of Antiochus's empire, and it has ever since. This is why Jesus could use imagery from Daniel to describe and confront the oppressive leaders he confronted in Jerusalem. This is why John, the visionary who wrote the Revelation, could adapt Daniel's visions and apply them to Rome of his day and also all future oppressive empires. And so the point of Daniel is that all generations of readers can find here a pattern and a promise. It's a pattern that human beings and their kingdoms become violent beasts when they glorify their own power, when they redefine right and wrong, and don't acknowledge God as their true king. But Daniel also holds out a promise that one day God will confront the beast. He will rescue his world and his people by bringing his kingdom over all nations. And so for every generation, this book speaks a message of hope that should motivate faithfulness. And that's what the book of Daniel is all about.
Despite what it looks like, God is in control. And that's good news for a conquered kingdom like Israel at the opening of the book of Daniel. For Nebuchadnezzar, the king of Babylon, had come and laid siege upon God's promised land and his chosen population. Israel's temple was plundered, their land was sabotaged, and their king Jehoiakim was made a slave in Babylonia. But this was not the only way Babylon wreaked havoc on the kingdom of Israel. They also captured their nobility, their wisest and their most capable, one of whom was a man named Daniel. Yet the most surprising statement we come upon is not that the temple's holy ground was trampled on, or that its holy objects were taken to a pagan temple in which they did not belong. It's not even that evil Babylon conquered the Holy Land. The most surprising statement we find is that it was God himself who gave Israel into their enemy's hand. And this is really what the book of Daniel communicates as a whole, that even when the worst events imaginable begin to unfold, someone is still on the throne. Because despite what it looks like, God is in control. For this destruction was already foretold. For Israel and their king had committed all kinds of evil. They had defiled the temple, neglected orphans and widows, and even built and worshipped false idols. Sin was on their throne and needed to be overthrown. So God sent them a prophet named Jeremiah, and through him promised that he would send the Babylonians to demolish them, to punish their sin, to bring about their destruction. But God's people didn't listen. They refused their opportunity for repentance. And so from God's land, they were evicted. Daniel and his friends were taken to Babylon to serve their king, to worship their gods, to become Babylonian down to the bone. But Daniel knew that even though Nebuchadnezzar was in power, God was still on the highest throne. And so God rose Daniel to a place of prominence in order to show that he alone reigns over every king. It is God's kingdom that will remain after all others have been overthrown. And he made this known through Daniel and his friends by a series of miraculous events. Daniel and his friends refused to eat the unclean food offered by the king. But God's control made it so that they grew fat from nothing but water and greens. The king was driven mad by a dream no one could interpret accurately. But God's control made it so this unknown mystery was seen by Daniel clearly. Daniel's friends were thrown into a furnace for not bowing to the king's golden image. But God's control made it so not even their clothes were singed by the embers. As King Nebuchadnezzar's power increased, he became proud and boasted of his strength. But God's control made it so the king became like a wild beast, to show that God is truly over every empire's highest seat. The king's son threw a feast and drank wine from Israel's holy object, which Nebuchadnezzar had seized. But God's control made it so. The writing on the wall, which only Daniel could read, spoke of this king's downfall by the Persians and the Medes. And finally, Daniel was thrown into a lion's den for praying to God when it was forbidden. But God's control made it so. The lions' hunger was overridden. Their mouths were shut to show that no matter the power, kingdom, or position, God has full dominion. All of these stories in Daniel contribute to a central goal, and that is to show that despite what it looks like, God is in control. Now, these stories which show God's control only compose the first half of the book, but the second half will show how God's control is going to look. While the first half is filled with stories of God's provisions, the second half is filled with visions. And these visions were given to Daniel. Visions of kingdoms that rise and fall. Visions of beastly empires being uninstalled. Visions of war, both in and outside Israel's walls. But no matter what the visions depict or what their symbols are called, the hope of every vision is the same. God is in charge of it all. One day, he is going to place his own king over every nation and every land. One king whose kingdom will always stand. One king who has actually reigned ever since the world began. And this king in Daniel is called the Son of Man. But when Daniel's visions had come to an end, and when his life and his book had finished being penned, that Son of Man had still not come for them. For as the visions promised, God's kingdom would come long after Daniel and his friends. It would come after the Persians, Medes, Greeks, and Babylonians. It would even extend to the time of Caesar and the Romans. For even though Israel was back in their land, they were still waiting for their Savior. They were still waiting for the Son of Man. And so when Jesus came and applied the title Son of Man to himself, he was saying that he fulfilled its role. He is the Son of Man, the book of Daniel foretold. He is God's king who would spread God's rule from pole to pole. But he would not do so by fitting the Babylonian mold. No, he would not reach his goal through furnaces, lions' dens, or amassing armies and gold. Instead, he would transform a cross into his throne. Because every nation, every king, every person was ruled by the same thing. It's the thing that led to Israel's destruction and Babylon's demise. It's the thing that toppled kingdoms and rules every life. It's the thing that makes us put ourselves on the throne instead of him. And that thing is called pride, lust, greed. That thing is called sin. So when Jesus left his throne to take up the cross, he made our sin his own. But despite what it looked like, he was still in control because Jesus rose from the dead and now he sits on the highest throne above every president, army, and power unknown, in order to give us this vision, to give us this hope that this Jesus who conquered sin and Sheol will return to reign forever, as Daniel has told. So take heart, for he has and does and will forever have the world in his hold. For despite what it looks like, Jesus is in control. Hey, David here.
Okay, guys, welcome to class here. Make sure that I am in the right spot here. All right, welcome to class. When we're going over the book of Daniel today. We're book of Daniel. Can you see that, Anthony?
Yeah, looks good.
Were you able to see the video, right?
Yeah, I saw all the videos. Yeah.
Cool. I was just making sure. I didn't know if I had to unpin myself. Yeah. Okay. I want to go over here. This is where we're at in the Old Testament. And see if I can. Old Testament, we're in this part here, exile in Babylon here. Daniel Ezekiel time frame. Introduction and title. Let me go over that right now. Introduction and title here. So I'm gonna go here and go here. Introduction and title. So that of the book of Daniel is placed in after the prophet. The prophecy of Daniel is in a different place in Hebrew scriptures. So the Hebrew Bible is divided into 3 sections: the law, the prophets, and the writings, right? So the first division is the 5 books of Moses, the second is the prophet, Joshua, Judges, Daniel, Isaiah, Jeremiah, Ezekiel, the first 12 minors, prophets. And the third complication is called the writings. It contains 12 books: Psalms, Proverbs, Job, Song of Solomon, Ruth, Lamentations, Esther, Daniel, Ezra, and Nehemiah, and First and Second Corinthians are counted as one book. Thus, the book of Daniel is not included among the prophets. Second major division, nor is the man referred in this book as a prophet. Also, God did not deliver a message through Daniel publicly to the nation of Israel. He does not speak directly to Israel. Yet Jesus called Daniel a prophet in Matthew 24:15. Certainly, he was God's messenger with God's message to reveal God's truth, had this close to him. An author, the book bears a simple title, Daniel, not because he is one of the chief characters, not only because he, but more specifically follows a custom. It's not substance of the name of the author. Little is known about Daniel's family background from the testimony of his contemporaries. He was known for his righteousness, his wisdom. He is mentioned in these passages with Noah and Job. So Daniel was a historical person, not a fictional character. Daniel was born to a royal family and was a noble birth. He was physically attractive, mentally sharp. He lived at least until the 3rd year of Cyrus, that is, till 536 BC. Therefore, he must have been a young man when he was taken by Nebuchadnezzar in 605 BC in 1 Daniel 4. If he were 16 when he was captured, he was 85. So it's 30 years. So there you go. So here, Daniel's life ministry, 70 years of Babylonian captivity. He was deported probably at 16, picked for government service. He was prophetic mouthpiece to Jews and Gentiles. And then here, the chapters. One is Daniel's history. So this is divided here: Daniel's history, Nebuchadnezzar's image, Darius Didic, and then the other part of the book, 2, 4, 5, 7, 9, 8, 9, 12. 12 is the Nebuchadnezzar's dreams, Belshazzar's feast, 4 beasts, 70 weeks, ram and goat. So 9 out of the 12 chapters in this book revolve around dreams. So the book of Daniel is definitely a book of dreams. Of dreams here. You see this in throughout the book. Whether it was near a dream or vision, So you see this being consistent with that. One of the important things of the book is the book of Daniel is important historically. It bridges the gap between Israel's Israel's sorry guys Israel's history in the seven. It bridges the gap between Israel's historical books in the New Testament. It's records certain events in Israel's history in the 70 years, which are recorded nowhere else in Scripture except for snatches of information in Ezekiel. Daniel outlines the history of times of Gentiles and describes the past and future empires to occupy Palestine and rule over Israel till the Messiah returns. The prophecies in the book concerning God's program for Gentiles for the land of Palestine and the people of Israel laid the foundation for his eschatological program. Some things introduced in the book of Daniel is emphasis on Gentiles are parallel in the book of Zechariah. The themes introduced in this book came to the ultimate consultation in the book of Revelation. To fully consummate God's program revealed to the Apostle John in Revelation is necessary to present the intention of his program revealed to Daniel. One of the purposes, sorry here, to see statues here. So you see the title here, introduction here is God's guidance, God's intervention, God's power. So Daniel's name, which is going to be a question on here, is God is my judge. His name after the author, which is Greek, Latin, and English Daniel. And then for the author, he was Judean noble families. And who there was no blemish, good looking, gifted in all wisdom, mostly knowledge, quick to understand, reunification process, Bel protect his life. And it was under the Babylonian on here, they rename him. Then you see Daniel's wisdom, interpreted abilities, served Nebuchadnezzar. You see the predominance, especially in the court. He was, one of the top besides Nebuchadnezzar. Nothing negative is written about Daniel. Life is characterized by faith, prayer, courage, consistency, like there. So you don't see any issues here. Greatly beloved, mentioned 3 times by Ezekiel. Daniel claimed authorship. Uses autobiography first person in 7:2:4. Jewish Talmud agrees that Daniel was the author. Price contributes a quote from Daniel to the prophet. They inciting. So the historical background of Daniel, Nineveh was the Syrian capital, fell before the assault of the forces of Babylon and Media in 612 before Christ, under the leadership of Ashur, the leadership of the Babylonians, the Assyrians fled westward. Moving 611, and then against the Syrian forces, the next year 610, Babylonian and allied with Medes, and then so essentially 605, Nebuchadnezzar led the battle against Egypt. And then Nebuchadnezzar returned to Judah. So Nebuchadnezzar returned to Judah. So the restoration of Israel was possible in 539. So you see there were 3 returns there. But the purpose of this book was to indigenous conduct. Daniel's personal dedication to God would have been examples of the deportees, how they should live in a heathen society. Daniel served an outstanding example of godliness to the exiles. The book emphasized God's sovereignty over Gentile nations, how he establishes and opposes kings and empires to serve his purpose. It was this great truth from Nebuchadnezzar came to understand. And third, the book gives an example of God's faithfulness to his covenant people in protecting and preserving, even though they were under divine discipline for their obedience. God does not cast out disobedience. The book was written to outline graphically the period known as the times of the Gentiles. So Gentiles would come to the conclusion in the coming tribulation period. Gentile nations will have on Israel while she waits God's covenants to her to be fulfilled under Messiah reign. Daniel's book also reveals Israel's future deliverance as God's covenant with Abraham. And even though there were discipline on there, so you see that there. Babylon fell on here. So here you go here. Alexander the Great. Necessary letter of return. So you see some of the kingdoms here. Dating questions here. 2nd century or 6th century for various reasons argued that Daniel is a Protestant book written in the time of Maccabees in the 2nd century. The arguments are not compelling. So obviously it was not the 2nd century book. It was actually 6th century. And the reasons why we have 6th century is prophetic argument. Chapter 11 has 100 specific prophecies and theological bias. The prophetic argument holds that Daniel couldn't have made such accurate predictions. It would have been prophecies after the event. Chapter 11 contains over 100 specific historical events that literally came true. The author, critics have lived in the time Antiochus and Pius, and probably wrote to the strengthen the faith of the Jews. But this argument is set up a theological bias. Assumes that true prophecy cannot take place. It also implies that the book is essentially deceptive. Here's the arguments for the Hellenistic argument. It's a prophetic argument. This argument claims the use of late Arabic in chapter 2 to 7 was that the priests and Greek words also point to a later date. But recent discoveries show that Daniel Aramaic is actually a form of early Imperial Aramaic. Daniel's use of some Persian words is no argument for a late date, since he continued living in the Persian period under Cyrus. The only Greek words that are named the only Greek words that are musical instruments in chapter 3. It comes no surprise there were Greek merchants in Syria and Babylonians. Far more Greek words would be expected if they were read in the 2nd century. So you see Aramaic, you see historical argument. Historical asserts that Daniel's historical work argue for a later date, but recent evidences to demonstrate historical accuracies of Daniel. Descriptions found show that Belshazzar reigned in Babylon while his father Nebuchadnezzar was fighting the invading Persian. Darius the Mede has been identified as a governor appointed by Cyrus. Now let's move deeper into the story of Daniel. The paucity of the Old Testament. Daniel, the Apostle, presents a striking detail and compressed sweep of prophetic history. After an introductory chapter, Daniel switches from Aramaic, chapter 2 to 7, describes the future course of Gentile world powers. And then chapters 8 to 12, Daniel reverts back to the native language to survey the future of the Jewish nations under Gentile dominion. So some of the themes here, the theme of God's sovereignty and control of the affairs of world history clearly emerges and provides comfort to the future church as well as to the Jews whose nations was destroyed by Babylonians. The Babylonians and Greeks will go but God will establish his kingdom forever through his redempted people forever. Talking through Daniel, you see the focus is divisions, topics. So history of Daniel, you see chapter 1, Daniel's background. You see prophetic plan for the Gentiles here and the prophetic plan for Israel. Read divisions. The chapter introduces the book of giving the background, preparation. Daniel is supported along with other promising youth. Placed in the intensive training program in the Nebuchadnezzar's court. Their names and diets are changed so they will lose their Jewish identity, but Daniel is ultimately faithful to the Lord is rewarded. He and his friends are granted wisdom and knowledge. The prophetic plan for Gentiles in chapter 2 to 7 is only Daniel can relate and interpret Nebuchadnezzar's disturbing dream to great statue. God empowers Daniel to foretell the way in which the sovereign race and oppose the Gentile empires. The Messiah's kingdom will end the times of the Gentiles. Because of his position revealed in the dream, Nebuchadnezzar erupts a golden image and demands that all bow to it. The persecution and preservation of Daniel's friends in the fiery furnace again illustrates the power of God as Nebuchadnezzar refuses to respond to the warning of his vision of the tree, and he is humble until he acknowledges the supremacy of God and the foolishness of his pride. The feast of Balthasar marks the end of the Babylonian kingdom. The Balthasar is judged because of his arrogant defiance of God. In the reign of Darius, a plot against Daniel backfires when he's divinely delivered them of lions. Daniel's courage and faith is rewarded, and Darius learns a lesson about the mighty of the God of Israel. The visions of the fourth beast supplements the four-part vision of chapter 2, portrays of the Babylonian, Persians, Greeks, and the Roman Empire. But once again, the saints of the Most High shall receive the kingdom, possess the kingdom forever. Prophetic plan for Israel, the focus in Israel narrows a vision of the ram and goat. It shows Israel under the Medo Persian and Greek empires. Alexander the Great is the big horn, and Nikkei is the little horn. As for Daniel, prayer. Call Michelle. I'm recording. Little horn. As for Daniel, prayer of confession for his people. He is where's part of the song? Little horn. After Daniel's prayer of confession to his people, he's privileged to receive the revelation in 70 weeks, including the Messiah's atoning death. And this gives a chronology of God's perfect plan for the redemption and deliverance of his people. Redemption of his people. Deliverance following the great vision, giving amazing details. Chapter 11, the wars between the promises of Egypt. God was sent out, tribulation resurrected. The topics move from Daniel's background, chapter 1, to the Daniel's interpreting over dreams, to the angels interpreting Daniel dreams in the remainder of the book. Chapter 2 to 7 reverts back to the older book. So themes and purpose. So some of the themes here, Daniel was written to encourage the exiled Jews by revealing God's sovereign program for Israel during and after the period of the Gentile dominance. The times of the Gentiles began with the Babylonian captivity, and Israel will suffer under Gentile power for many years. But this period was not permanent, but a time will come when God will establish a messianic kingdom that will last forever. Purpose, you see, Daniel repeatedly emphasizes the sovereignty and power of God over human affairs. The Most High rules in the kingdom of man and gives it to whoever he chooses. The God directs the forces of history. Has not deserted his people. They must continue to trust him because his promises of preservation and ultimate restoration is ready as coming as the Messiah. Now we turn to the keys to understanding Daniel. God's plan for Israel, right? Key verses here, you see one of the two key verses in Daniel reflecting his key word is found in chapter 2. Daniel answered and said, "Blessed is the name of the God forever and ever, and might for honor. He changes time, season. He changes times and seasons. He removes kings, raises up kings. He gives wisdom to the wise, knowledge to those who have understanding." So you see here God's sovereignty in his kingdom. God is in control. He changes, he removes, he rises up kings. So when the Nebuchadnezzar thought, hey, I challenge him, God, their gods is gone. God was now able to show judgment upon him and show that he was the one in control. Key verses, he reveals deep and secret things. He knows what's in darkness, and light dwells with him. Key verses, in the days of these kings, in chapter 2 of the days of kings, God will set up a kingdom which he will never destroy. The kingdom shall not be left to other people. It shall be break in pieces and consume all these kingdoms. It shall stand forever. In key chapter 9 is prophecy of 70 weeks. Provides a chronological frame for the Messiah prediction from the time of Daniel to the establishment of the kingdom on earth. It's clear that the first 69 weeks were fulfilled at Christ's coming. Some scholars have run the last week had not been fulfilled, and it relates to the major events, the second coming, or to proceed as applying to the Roman desecration of the temple in 70 AD. Quotations of the Bible. Ezekiel's emphasis of Israel's religious restoration. While Ezekiel emphasized that religious restoration, Daniel concentrated on its political restoration. Daniel was clearly a prophet. He did not combine the prophetic office by making public proclamation to the people as God's representative, like Jeremiah and Ezekiel. Therefore, his books was placed in the writings, the third division of the Hebrew Bible, rather than the prophets. Because it's a apocryphal literature, Daniel has many similarities to Revelation. Its images and symbolism. So you see the connection with Daniel and Revelation. Some believe it was fulfilled before, during the 1st century AD. Others believe that the portions await future fulfillment. I will argue it waits for future fulfillment. The second view argues that the events of 69 were literally fulfilled in the 4 kingdoms. The events of the 70 will be literally fulfilled in the future. So now let's take a look at which Christ is portrayed in Daniel. There are types of Christ. Christ is the great stone crushing the kingdoms of this world. I think we can read that. Acts, I think Daniel 2:34-44. I'm gonna ask my friend, my buddy here, 34, Acts 2 here. 34:2. Well, I guess I can read it here. Right? You can read it, brother. 24. What's it? 24 to 34 to 44.
Okay, so read 2:34 to 44.
Yeah.
Got it. Okay. All right. Daniel. Okay. All right. While you were watching, a rock was cut out, but not by human hands. It struck the statue on its feet of iron and clay and smashed them. Then the iron, the clay, the bronze, and the silver, and the gold were all broken to pieces and became like chaff on a threshing floor in the summer. The wind swept them away without leaving a trace, but the rock that struck the statue became a huge mountain and filled the whole earth. This was the dream, and now we will interpret it to the king. Your Majesty, you are the King of Kings. The God of heaven has given you dominion and power and might and glory. In your hands he has placed all mankind and the beasts of the field and the birds in the sky. Wherever they live, he has made you ruler over them all. You are the head of gold. After you, another kingdom will arise, inferior to yours. Next, a third kingdom, one of bronze, will rule over the whole earth. Finally, there will be a fourth kingdom, strong as iron, for iron breaks and smashes everything. And as iron breaks things to pieces, so it will crush and break all the others. Just as you saw that the feet and toes were partly of baked clay and partly of iron, so this will be a divided kingdom. Yet it will have some of the strength of iron in it, even as you saw iron mixed with clay. As the toes were partly iron and partly clay, so this kingdom will be partly strong and partly brittle. And just as you saw the iron mixed with baked clay, so the people will be a mixture and will not remain united any more than iron mixes with clay. In the time of those things, in the time of those kings, the God of heaven will set up a kingdom that will never be destroyed, nor will it be left to another people. It will crush all those kingdoms and bring them to an end, but it will itself endure forever. Amen.
Amen. Amen. I'm gonna. What about now? Okay. Awesome. I caught that there. So the Son of Man is given dominion by the Ancient of Days. So you see in Daniel 7, 13 and 14. 7, 13, 14 here. See the Daniel here is in my vision at night. I looked therefore before me saw like a Son of Man coming with the clouds of heaven. He approached the Ancient of Days and was led into his presence. He was given authority, glory, sovereign power. All nations and peoples of every language worship him. His dominion is everlasting dominion that will not pass away. His kingdom is one that will never be destroyed. So you see that there. Going back here. You see the Son of Man's giving over here. So in the coming Messiah will be cut off. So 925, you see Christ here. The Messiah here, 925. Now note this, from this on, I'm going to restore the and reveal Israel to the Messiah, to the anointed one, the ruler. There will be 77 67s, and will be rebuilt times of trouble. After the 67s, anointed one will be put to death and will have nothing. The people of the ruler will come and destroy the city, sanctuary, and the end will come like a flood. War will continue to end, desolation of decree. He will confirm a covenant for 170, and the temple will set up this abomination until the decrees pour out on him. So you see the point of the Antichrist and Jesus here. See the Messiah will be cut off. It's likely that in exhibition the 10:5:9 was the appearance of Christ. So 10, if you look at 10:5:9 here, there's an appearance of Christ here. I looked up, before me was a man dressed in linen with a belt of fine gold, used on his waist. His body was like theirs. His eyes, his face was like lightning. His light eyes like a flaming torch. His arms and legs were in browns. His voice said that I, Daniel, saw the vision until you saw that here. Here, and then, okay, so he saw a vision probably of Christ. Vision of the 70 weeks. The vision of 69 points of coming Messiah. The decrees would take place on March 4th, 44:5. The Messiah, the 69-week equals 438 years. Or using a 360-day prophetic year, this would lead to March 29, AD 33, the date of the triumph entry. So you see here, this was predicted to the T on this predicted to the T here on the T here on the T here about the coming Messiah here. So decree took place on 44 BC, right? 436. If we use the prophetic calendar, its triumph entry is here. So you see that it is showing everything on here. From 44 BC to AD 33 is 476 years. 25 plus difference is between March 4 to March 29 equals 178, 73, 88 days. This is checked by noting that 44 exceeds 476 equals 173 days by adding 25. For the difference between March 4th and March 29th gives 173, 88 days. So, and that's the time frame that Jesus here. We don't have to be technical application. Our first application revolves around the Quranic idea that God uses weakness for his glory. He uses for exile, teenage boys were given a supernatural understanding by God, not for their glory, but for God's glory. These were experiences powerful, tested. Older men had seen God work for decades as adults. These word boys are the youngest positive examples. The Bible, the youngest examples surviving severe trial, 900-mile charioteer from Jerusalem to Babylon after Nebuchadnezzar's destruction of Jerusalem. These young lads were handpicked by the Babylonians, were the best and brightest of Israel's royalty, and its privileged slaves were indoctrinated for 3 years in the language, literature, paganism, and customs of Babylon. They were placed along the conditions of Babylon and faced tremendous spiritual warfare as their lives were to be destroyed because of Nebuchadnezzar's anger. That none of the wise men and physicians could determine and interpret his dreams. This is all of them except for Daniel. We find that God deliberately choosing the weak, such as Moses, as a spokesman to Pharaoh, in spite of his stuttering and paring Gideon's army, 320 down to the 300 soldiers. God using Shepherd boy completely untrained in battle against a fierce giant warrior Goliath. In the New Testament, we see God's choosing to use ordinary fishermen as a cord to spread his good news around the world. He said to me, my grace is sufficient, for my power is perfect weakness. Most gladly, therefore, I will rather boast about my weakness, so the power of Christ may dwell in me. And then here you see, therefore, whatever your weakness, whatever powerless, you know that God opposes the proud, but gives grace to the humble. 1 Peter 5:2. Then you see never underestimates how God can use weakness. Never underestimate God can use weakness in your life and the life of others, including teenagers. His power is perfecting weakness. Daniel was a great example of lay ministry. Daniel's life in general, rather than one particular chapter. Daniel was a great example of lay ministry. Daniel's lay ministry is ruler, dream interpreter, man of prayer, prophet. Daniel was a perfect Israel's royal and demonstrated their leadership capability upon the Babylonian Empire. The Persian Empire, he was wise, skilled ruler to earn confidence, trust of his captors. He also had spiritual gift of dream interpretation and was a man of habitual prayer as well as prophet. The entire second half of the book, Daniel, unfolds a very complex geopolitical prophecy from Daniel's all the way to the end of human history. Then when God sets up his own kingdom. So not a priest, royalty. The point of Daniel was not a priest. He and his friend were royalty, not a tribe of Levite, which was a requirement of priesthood. Thought of the term lay does not occur in scriptures. It's a helpful distinction. It's a non-priest, lay or lay person. Daniel was chosen, represents the Nebuchadnezzar. An example there. The Aaronic priesthood, as application today, the priesthood, Aaronic priesthood, lasted temporarily for 1400 years from the time of Moses and Christ being crucified on the cross at Calvary. Before and after that time, each man was his own priest. This was known as the priesthood of believers. Each believer represent himself to God and represent God to others. As such, believers function their role as God's priests. Hebrews 11. In fact, the New Testament Hall of Faith, we find no Levitical priests or rabbis mentioned. Levites came from Joseph's brother, Levi, so none existed until the time thus Abel, Enoch, Noah, Abraham, Isaac, Jacob, Sarah, all lived before the time of priests. Joseph was not from the tribe of Levi, or Moses was. Lyrical became his brother. Noted Rahab was not from the tribe of Gideon, was the tribe of Manasseh. Dan, Manasseh, David was the tribe of Judah. None of these were priests. They were lay people, not professional clergies. No priests. So here you see a verse, but today each person has the right responsibility to be his own priest. First Peter teaches you are chosen, raised a royal priesthood, a holy nation, a people of God's own possession, that you proclaim the excellency of him who has called you of darkness and his miraculous light. Thus, every believer has the right and responsibility to be a priest of God. We are full-time representatives. We are no more part-time representatives of Jesus than we are part-time members of our earthly family. Priesthood is part of each believer's identity in Christ, as we should expect to pay professions as our pastor, priest, church staff to work the work of ministry. Their job is to equip so-called people, lay people at their work. The question is, how good of a priest representative are you? What do you need to do to take your personal ministry to the next level? If you don't yet have any ministry, ask yourself, if you are willing to pray for a mentor to equip you for ministry, what skills or information development you need to improve your ability to minister to others? Give this thought, prayer, and perhaps discussion that matters with your pastors or your elders. So just think about that, Um, 3 ways God delivers from the book of Daniel. Deliverance, Daniel 1, spare from trial and will survive. First, God may deliver us completely from trial that we go through. For example, Daniel 1, Daniel, his friends were delivered from there to decree of execution because none of the Babylonian wise men, magicians could interpret the dreams. God did not make Daniel try and go any trial. Any trial. If God delivers from trial, we would not have to endure the trial. God removes the trial from us, thus we survive the trial. Or through the trial. A second option, God may deliver us through the trial. Example, God made Daniel go through the process of being thrown through the furnace, but miraculously saved. You see Daniel 8 here. Similarly, in Daniel 6, God did not spare Daniel from the society of death, but being eaten alive by wild animals. But miraculously shut the mouths of lions. He was not delivered from going to lion's den, but he was delivered through the near-death experience. This was true of God's delivering Israel from Egypt by making cross the Red Sea while he miraculously parted as a cross and then closing upon the Egyptian army. God delivered through a trial, had to endure the trial and not be spared of it. However, in spite of the facts that we have to go through it, we will survive it. Deliverance into the arms of Jesus. Third option is being delivered to the arms of Jesus, not near the book of Daniel or the Bible records of Daniel's death, where by the age or sickness, God chose to not deliver him from that trial, unlike Enoch. Nor did God choose to deliver Daniel through the trial, but rather God delivered him to his loving, strong, wise arms by ending his earthly journey. In many cases, Hebrew 11 experienced mocking, scourgings, yes, even chains, imprisonment. They were stoned, they were tempted. Deliverance, when God delivers by trial, we will indeed have to endure trials, and we will not survive it. However, by this trial, we will be delivered to Jesus' arms. So God may deliver us from, through, and by our trials. But according to the apostle, even the third one is not a bad one. And for me to live is to die to gain. Paul views his death being delivered into arms of Jesus, not only because Paul knew his God, but also knew the knowledge of heaven. And about what he told the Marinois theme, what God has prepared to those he loves, as infinite creatures, our minds are incapable of wonders of heaven. And that heaven will not look nothing like we ever seen or heard from, or ever image. Our destinies, our loving fathers, whom we behold face to face, will be truly experienced beyond words and imagination. So this is at the ending of this slide here. So I'm going to go to Daniel 1, since that was just an introduction of Daniel. That was just a brief overview of Daniel. Now we're going to go more in depth to Daniel. We still got an hour. I promise that I will not. I promise to not go over the hour, but I definitely know that we're not done yet. I'm gonna ask my my one and only Anthony student here to read chapter 1, so we can get into the details with Daniel here.
Amen. Excuse me. In the 3rd year of the reign of Jehoiakim, king of Judah, Nebuchadnezzar, king of Babylon, came to Jerusalem and besieged it. And the Lord delivered Jehoiakim, king of Judah, into his hand, along with some of the articles from the temple of God. These he carried off. Excuse me. These he carried off to the temple of his God in Babylonia, and put in the treasure house of his God. Then the king ordered Ashpenaz, chief of his court officials, to bring into the king's service some of the Israelites from the royal family and the nobility. Young men without any physical defect, handsome, showing aptitude for every kind of learning, well informed, quick to understand, and qualified to serve in the king's palace. He was to teach them the language and the literature of the Babylonians. The king assigned them a daily amount of food and wine from the king's table. They were to be trained for 3 years, and after that, they were to enter the king's service. Among those who were chosen were some from Judah: Daniel, Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah. The chief officials gave them new names: to Daniel the name Belteshazzar, to Hananiah Shadrach, to Mishael Meshach, and to Azariah Abednego. But Daniel resolved not to defile himself with the royal food and wine, and he asked the chief official for permission not to defile himself this way. Now God had caused the official to show favor and compassion to Daniel. But the official told Daniel, I am afraid of my lord, the king, who has assigned your food and drink. Why should he see you looking worse than the other young men your age? The king would then have my head because of you. Daniel then said to the guard whom the chief official had appointed over Daniel, Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah, please test your servants for 10 days. Give us nothing but vegetables to eat and water to drink. Then compare our appearance with that of the young men who eat the royal food, and treat your servants in accordance with what you see. So he agreed to this and tested them for 10 days. At the end of 10 days, they looked healthier and better nourished than any of the young men who ate the royal food. So the guard took away their choice food and the wine that they were to drink and gave them vegetables instead. To these 4 young men, God gave knowledge and understanding of all kinds of literature and learning. Daniel could understand visions and dreams of all kinds. At the end of the time set by the king to bring them into his service, the chief official presented them to Nebuchadnezzar. The king talked with them, and he found none equal to Daniel, Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah. So they entered the king's service. In every matter of wisdom and understanding about which the king questioned them, he found them 10 times better than all the magicians and enchanters in his whole kingdom. And Daniel remained there until the first year of King Cyrus. Amen.
Oh, awesome. Awesome. Let me right here. So, chapter 1 here, the two verses of the book of Daniel, when and how the prophet was taken to Babylon. The event is in the book beginning of the 3rd year of the reign of Joachim, king of Judah. That seems to conflict with Jeremiah's statement, the first in Nebuchadnezzar, king of Babylon. At least 2 explanations will be given. Not going to go into those explanations, but Daniel referred to Nebuchadnezzar as now has protected my inheritance. The king of Babylon, Nebuchadnezzar, had not seated the throne. However, Nebuchadnezzar was in battle, heard of the death of his father, and hasted to be Babylon to be enthroned. Writing at a later date, Daniel referred to Nebuchadnezzar as king and the accusation of his occupation of the throne. Nebuchadnezzar besieging of Jerusalem took place during the reign of Joachim, the 17th king of Judah and the eldest of Josiah. Joachim, the younger brother of Josiah, had been placed on Judah's throne after Pharaoh Nebuchadnezzar killed Josiah. But Nebuchadnezzar deposed Josiah and placed Joachim on the throne. Jeremiah had warned Joachim of the impending invasion of Babylon. Joachim had heard the prophet's instruction to God's people to submit to Babylon while resistance. So when Nebuchadnezzar besieged the city, little or no resistance was offered. Joachim was captured and taken to Babylon. Thus, Judah came under Nebuchadnezzar's authority. In this incursion by Nebuchadnezzar, an important prophetic time period in the times of Gentiles. John tells us in which the land is given and covenanted by God to Abraham, and the son is occupied by Gentile powers. In the Vedic throne, is empty of any rightful heir in the Davidic kingdom. The times of Gentiles beginning when Nebuchadnezzar's invasion of Jerusalem in 605 will continue to the Messiah's return, and Christ would subdue the nations and deliver the land of Israel from its Gentile occupants and bring the nation Israel into her covenantal blessing in the millennial kingdom. God had made a covenant with Israel and Moab just before she entered the land. In his covenant, God set forth the principle in which he will deal with his people in their obedience would bring blessing but disobedience to him. And God will bring discipline. In his second portion, God outlined that disciplines he would use to correct when their walk was out of line with his revealed law. These disciplines will seek to conform them to his demands so they would be eligible for his blessings. The ultimate discipline he would use to correct his people was the invasion of Gentile nations, who would subject them to their authority and disperse them from their lands. Moses then stated that when Israel will come under God's discipline, that discipline will not be lifted until people forsook their sin and turned their faith to God and obey his requirement. The northern kingdom of Israel had gone to captivity to Assyria, and this was outworking of the principles of Deuteronomy 28. From time to time, dotted not consistently, the southern kingdom in light of the fall in the north had heeded the prophet's admission and turned to God. The southern continued more than a century longer because of repentance, obedience under godly kings. That condition, however, did not last. Judah was not ignorant of God's covenant, neglected Sabbathing in the Sabbath year, and went into idolatry. Therefore, because of the covenant in Deuteronomy 28, judgment had to fall on Judah. God had chose Nebuchadnezzar's instrument to inflict discipline on God's disobedient people. Nebuchadnezzar returned to Babylon from this invasion. He brought spoils to satisfy Judah's submission to Babylon. First, he brought some valuable articles from the temple, and his god may have been Bel, also called Marduk, the chief god of the Babylonians. This will signify the consequence of God Judah by and then so moving on from here, verse 4 or 5, these captives were young men, both physically and mentally such. They would be access to the king's palace and intent to assimilate them into culture of the court, where they were compelled to learn about the language and the literature of the people along them they now dwell. They had to undergo a rigorous 3-year course of training after they were to enter the king's service and their education here. So the names on here is the original names was Yahweh has been gracious and became Shagrig, I am faithful of God. Missing who is what is God. I'm despised and humble before my God. Yahweh has helped. Was Abednego, Nego, servant Nego, and the chief fourth official determined the bearing any testimony to God Israel from there. So he gave 4 men, symbolized they were be subject to the Babylonian gods. The Nebuchadnezzar had made provision for captives, that they were given food from the king's table on there. So the same from the Old Testament, drink of strong drinks and the meats. The Babylonians did not dilute their wine, so they would have defiled these young men. Then he knew the requirements of the law concerning they should not eat and drink. And should please God in all he did. So he resolved that he was not in his own land, but in a culture that did not follow God's law. He would consider himself under law. He therefore asked the officials to be excused from eating and drinking wine generously supplied by the king. Daniel was courageous and determined to obey God. And then the chief official decided to grant Daniel's request. Is understandable. He was responsible to oversee the young captives' physical, mental development, so they became prepared the roles the king had in mind for them. Evidently, these young youth held a strategy place in the king's plans. So he wanted them well trained. If the man had been low consequence to the king, physical conditions had mattered, it would not risk the loss of his life. Daniel had trusted his situation to God, who intervened on Daniel's behalf to move officials' hearts to show favor, sympathy to Daniel. When Daniel's request seemed to have been denied by the chief official, Daniel approached the guard. He did a 10-day trial, in which Daniel and his companion would have been given only vegetables. Since vegetables designate no vegetable unclean, Daniel could eat any vegetable before and will defile himself. So short time, there could have been no mark of deliberation that would jeopardize the life of anyone in authority. In fact, Daniel hinted that their appearance would look better than that of orders. better, since the guard was under the chief official's authority. He must have not acted on his own, but with permission from Asa. This includes God's intervention on behalf of those who trust him, and protect and preserve those who obey him. In the conclusion of the 10 days, the four had lived on here. So you see Daniel's appointment here. He gave him knowledge. Right here. So we're gonna go Daniel 2. I'm gonna ask our favorite Bible scholar here, Anthony Coney. And I'm gonna ask Daniel to read Daniel 2 here.
All right.
Over here.
Okay. Daniel 2. In the second year of his reign, Nebuchadnezzar had dreams. His mind was troubled, and he could not sleep. So the king summoned the magicians, the enchanters, the sorcerers, and the astrologers to tell him what he had dreamed. When they came in and stood before the king, he said to them, I have had a dream that troubles me, and I want to know what it means. Then the astrologers answered the king, May the king live forever. Tell your servants the dream, and we will interpret it. The king replied to the astrologers, This is what I have firmly decided. If you do not tell me what my dream was and interpret it, I will have to cut into pieces. I will have you cut into pieces and your houses turned into piles of rubble. But if you tell me the dream and explain it, you will receive from me gifts and rewards and great honor. So tell me the dream and interpret it for me. Once more they replied, Let the king tell his servants the dreams, and we will interpret it. Then the king answered, I am certain that you are trying to gain time because you realize that this is what I have firmly decided. If you don't tell me the dream, there is only one penalty for you. You have conspired to tell me misleading and wicked things, hoping the situation will change. So then, tell me the dream, and I will know that you can interpret it for me. The astrologers answered the king, There is no one on earth who can do what the king asks. No king, however great and mighty, has ever asked such a thing of any magician or enchanter or astrologer. What the king asks is too difficult. No one can reveal it to the king except the gods, and they do not live among humans. This made the king so angry and furious that he ordered the execution of all the wise men of Babylon. So the decree was issued to put the wise men to death, and men were sent to look for Daniel and his friends to put them to death. When Arioch, the commander of the king's guard, had gone out to put to death the wise men of Babylon, Daniel spoke to him with wisdom and tact. He asked the king's officer, Why did the king issue such a harsh decree? Arioch then explained the matter to Daniel. At this time went Daniel into the king and asked for time so that he might interpret the dream for him. Then Daniel returned to his house and explained the matter to his friends Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah. He urged them to plead for mercy from the God of heaven concerning this mystery, so that he and his friends might not be executed with the rest of the wise men of Babylon. During the night, the mystery was revealed to Daniel in a vision. Then Daniel praised the God of heaven and said, Praise be to the name of God forever and ever. Wisdom and power are his. He changes times and seasons. He deposes kings and raises up others. He gives wisdom to the wise and knowledge to the discerning. He reveals deep and hidden things. He knows what lies in darkness, and light dwells with him. I thank and praise you, God of my ancestors. You have given me wisdom and power. You have made known to me what we asked of you. You have made known to us the dreams of the kings. Then Daniel went to Arioch, whom the king had appointed to execute the wise men of Babylon, and said to him, Do not execute the wise men of Babylon. Take me to the king, and I will interpret his dream for him. Arioch took Daniel to the king at once and said, I have found a man among the exiles from Judah who can tell the king what his dream means. The king asked Daniel, also called Belteshazzar, Are you able to tell me what I saw in my dream and interpret it? Daniel replied, No wise man, enchanter, magician, or diviner can explain to the king the mystery he has asked about. but there is a God in heaven who reveals mysteries. He has shown King Nebuchadnezzar what will happen in the days to come. Your dream and the visions that passed through your mind as you were lying in bed are these. As your majesty was lying there, your mind turned to things to come, and the revealer of mysteries showed you what is going to happen. As for me, this mystery has been revealed to me, not because I have greater wisdom than anyone else alive, but so that your majesty may know that the interpretation and that you may understand what went through your mind. Your majesty looked, and there before you stood a large statue, an enormous, dazzling statue, awesome in appearance. The head of the statue was made of pure gold, its chest and arms of silver, its belly and thighs of bronze, its legs of iron, its feet partly with iron and partly with baked clay. While you were watching, a rock was cut out, but not by human hands. It struck the statue on its feet of iron and clay and smashed them. Then the iron and clay, the bronze and the silver and the gold were all broken to pieces and became like chaff on a threshing floor in the summer. The wind swept them away without leaving a trace. But the rock that struck the statue became a huge mountain and filled the whole earth. This was the dream that now we will interpret it to the king. Your majesty, you are the king of kings. The God of heaven has given you dominion and power and might and glory. In your hands he has placed all mankind and the beasts of the field and the birds in the sky. Wherever they live, he has made you ruler over them all. You are that head of gold. After you, another kingdom will arise inferior to yours. Next, a third kingdom, one of bronze, will rule over the whole earth. Finally, there will be a fourth kingdom, strong as iron. For iron breaks and smashes everything, and as iron breaks things to pieces, so it will crush and break all others. Just as you saw that the feet and toes were partly of baked clay and partly of iron, so this will be a divided kingdom. Yet it will have some of a strength of iron in it, even as you saw iron mixed with clay. As the toes were partly iron and partly clay, so this kingdom will be partly strong and partly brittle. And just as you saw the iron mixed with baked clay, so the people will be a mixture and will not remain united any more than iron mixes with clay. In the time of those kings, the God of heaven will set up a kingdom that will never be destroyed, nor will it be left to another people. It will crush all those kingdoms and bring them to an end, but it will itself endure forever. This is the meaning of the vision of the rock cut out of a mountain, but not by human hands, a rock that broke the iron and bronze the clay, the silver and the gold to pieces. The great God has shown the king what will take place in the future. The dream is true and the interpretation is trustworthy. Then King Nebuchadnezzar fell prostrate before Daniel and paid him honor and ordered that an offering and incense be presented to him. The king said to Daniel, "Surely your God is the God of gods and the Lord of kings and a revealer of mysteries, for you are able to reveal this mystery." Then the king placed Daniel in a high position and lavished many gifts on him. He made him ruler over the entire province of Babylon and placed him in charge of all its wise men. Moreover, at Daniel's request, the king appointed Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego administrators over the province of Babylon, while Daniel himself remained at the royal court.
Awesome. Thank you, brother. So, going back to 2 here. Sorry, I think I'm having issues here. So, just to move this along a little bit. Soon, so the dream of the king, right? So this is the famous, this is how Daniel's background, his dream is, every leader has there's an opportunity, and usually the opportunity is the form of a problem. And the reason why I say this is every problem can be an opportunity. When you are the problem solver, you become that you take on that new role. And you see many times in the Bible there was a need, and you see the person being able to move forward in this need. So verse 1, commentary here 2:1. Soon after Nebuchadnezzar's ascension to the throne, he was plagued with a recurring dream. Since Daniel recalled and interpreted only a single dream, the use of plural here, dream, seems to indicate recurrence of the same dream. This dream was evidently preceded by Nebuchadnezzar, having great significance, for he was troubled by the dream and so arrogant that he was unable to sleep. The king summoned the wise men of his realm. They professed to be able to foretell the future by one means or another. If the method used by one failed to produce the desired product, hopefully the method employed by another will reveal the dream certificates. They were called collectively to exercise their enchantment in order to give the king an interpretation. They will place him. The king challenged the wise men. I want to know what it means. The desperation of the wise men, not only the request to interpret a dream, had been made by the wise men on several occasions, for they were not surprised. It stated under languages. It's Hebrew, and the beginning of the words "O King," and then the language is Aramaic through 728. The wise men confidently asserted that the king revealed the dream to them. They will interpret it to him. They were confident that their collective wisdom they could satisfy the king with an interpretation. Thus, the king made up such demand on the wise king. Previously, that had been satisfied with the answer, he only had never asked them to interpret the dream. They discerned has such significance. So he decided to test them. If he could predict the future by interpreting dreams, they should be able to reconstruct the past and recall the king's dream. So he refused to share his dream with them. This means that he had not forgotten. Had he done so, the wise men, to save themselves, could have easily fabricated a dream and then interpreted it. The king thought if he could not recall the past, the prediction concerning the truth could not be trusted. The king had promised rewards for the wise men, recalling and interpreting the dream, but he would place them under death penalty. They would be cut into pieces. Their houses would be burned if they proved to be a false prognosticator who could not recall the dream. Again, the wise men asked the king to share the dream, promising to interpret it. The king complained that they were stalling for time. He again referred to the penalty for failure to tell him the dream. He felt that the only way he could trust their interpretation of the future is by having them first recall his dream. Otherwise, he would conclude they were conspiring to tell him and mislead him in wicked things. Also, Nebuchadnezzar had become impatient with the wise men, who were certainly older, that he had inherited them from his father. And the reason the test may have been he was suspicious of their claims to wisdom. To defend themselves, the wise men asserted that the king was making an unreasonable request, one they could never ask by another providence. They attested that the future belonged to the gods, not to man. Interesting, this omission they had deceived the king in their past interpretations and serve a revelation from those held in high state court. After wise men revealed that they were unable to satisfy the king's demand, the king was angry and furious. He placed an order for the execution of all the wise men of Babylon. The decree was not only for those currently serving in the king's court, but all who professed to be able to reveal the future. Since Daniel and his friends were classified as wise men, the judgment also will fall on them. So clear declaration of Daniel when he transpired in the royal court was unknown to Daniel. Had perhaps he refused to answer King Sun to avoid contact with pagan leaders, when the word came, it was under death penalty. He tactfully asked Archman, the commander of King's Guard, for the reason, and explained the incident had been exposed to wise men's deception of the king. Daniel boldly approached the king with a request that the executions be stayed for a while so he may be able to interpret the king's dream. This took boldness because the king already accused the wise men of wanting more time. Daniel was evidently held in high esteem by the king because he was permitted to access the king's presence and was able to petition the king. God have not recorded Daniel possibly interpreted dreams previously, but not necessarily for the king. So he was sure he could recall the dream and interpret it. In this time of testing, Daniel was calm. He returned to his house and sought out his 3 friends, and together they prayed for mercy from God, and 9 times in Ezra, 4 times in Nehemiah. Elsewhere, it occurs in Genesis 24-37. In response to the prayer of the 4, the dream was revealed to Daniel. Daniel responded appropriately by offering praise to God. He acknowledged that God is a God of wisdom, knowing from the beginning to the end, God of power, where he determines he can do. Daniel began and concluded his prayer speaking of God's wisdom. Evidence of power are seen as control of events and nations. Nebuchadnezzar was on the throne because God determined him to use him there to fulfill his will. Evidence of God's wisdom are seen in his imparting wisdom to the wise. Light dwells with God in the sense of all things are clear to him. Through the people are surrounded by darkness. God knows it can reveal the future. God, not Daniel, since I gave him the dream and its interpretation. Daniel's prayer will close with thanks. God revealed the king's dream to the 4 who had trusted in him. Receiving from God's knowledge of the dream, Daniel went to search and forming. Okay. Thing evidence. See. The king inquired where Daniel was able to tell him what he dreamed. Daniel was subject to the same test. For certainly the king demanded the wise men. Now Daniel asserted the wise men could not do by asserting their false deity. Daniel was able to do because there is a God in heaven who reveals mysteries. Daniel asserted the outset that of King's dream was prophetic about things to come and what was going to happen. Nebuchadnezzar's dream was forthcoming and subject to the Gentiles' power to Israel's Messiah. This time is called the times of Gentiles. This dream was given to Nebuchadnezzar, the first of many Gentiles who will exert power by giving appointment, and during the times of the Gentiles was revealing spiritual truth to Nebuchadnezzar for a political dominion the Gentiles will exercise, and everything in the dream will be readily understandable to Nebuchadnezzar. All right, so I'm going to move on here. I'm going to put Daniel summary chart. I'm going to read Daniel 3 here. Daniel 3. I'm going to ask Anthony here to read it here. So here we get to the dream that Nebuchadnezzar reads, and I'm going to touch quickly base on it. And then let me look at Daniel 4 here. Okay, so now let me just go over this then here. Nebuchadnezzar has a dream of the image of gold and the blazing furnace. This is shown later to deal with the 4 kingdoms. So the iron hits by a rock, and then Daniel's here. So Daniel 3, then consider stream. Okay, there, 3. Okay, no, that's fine. Then we can answer 2. Okay. So here is very important. Here, the rock, it shows the 4 kingdoms of the Roman Empire, from the Babylonian to Medo-Persians, Greeks, Rome, and then the future Antichrist kingdom. It shows those 4 kingdoms here. 10 toes showing the United Nations. And then it shows that Christ comes back. Christ came in the days there, but also Christ will come back for millenniums, which we hold to. It's hold that the kingdom will be established on earth. And then, during the times, Christ's time on earth, the Roman Empire did not have 10 kings yet, but 10 rulers who experience will be destroyed by him. And then Daniel is honored, and then he is shown here. But now I'm going to go to Daniel 7 here. We're going to go into the Son of Man passage. Here, and then I'm going to go, after the Son of Man, I'm going to go into Daniel 11 to 12. And then that will conclude the lecture for this week, for the Lord class here. I'm going to ask Anthony to read this out for us. Read this out for us here.
All right. Daniel 7. In the first year of Belshazzar, king of Babylon, Daniel had a dream, and visions passed through his mind as he was lying in bed. He wrote down the substance of his dream. Daniel said, "In my vision at night I looked, and there were before me were the 4 winds of heaven, churning up the great sea. 4 great beasts, each different from the others, came up out of the sea. The first was like a lion, and it had wings of an eagle. I watched until its wings were torn off, and it was lifted from the ground so that it stood on 2 feet like a human being, and the mind of a human was given to it. And there before me was a second beast, which looked like a bear. It was raised up on one of its sides, and it had 3 ribs in its mouth between its teeth. It was told, 'Get up and eat your fill of flesh.' After that I looked, and there before me was another beast, one that looked like a leopard, and on its back had 4 wings like those of a bird. This beast had 4 heads, and it was given authority to rule. After that, in my vision at night, I looked, and there before me was a 4th beast, terrifying and frightening and very powerful. It had large iron teeth. It crushed and devoured its victims, and trampled underfoot whatever was left. It was different from all the former beasts, and it had 10 horns. While I was thinking about the horns, there before me was another horn, a little one, which came up among them, and 3 of the first horns were uprooted before it. The horn had eyes like the eyes of a human being, and a mouth that spoke boastfully. As I looked, thrones were set in place, and the ancient of days took his seat. His clothing was as white as snow, the hair of his head was white like wool. His throne was a flaming fire, and its wheels were all ablaze. A river of fire was flowing, coming out from before him. Thousands upon thousands attended him. 10,000 times 10,000 stood before him. The court was seated, and the books were opened. Then I continued to watch because of the boastful words the horn was speaking. I kept looking until the beast was slain and its body destroyed and thrown into the blazing fire. The other beasts had been stripped of their authority, but were allowed to live for a period of time. In my vision at night I looked, and there before me was one like a son of man, coming with the clouds of heaven. He approached the Ancient of Days and was led into his presence. He was given authority, glory, and sovereign power. All nations and peoples of every language worshipped him. His dominion is an everlasting dominion that will not pass away. His kingdom is one that will never be destroyed. I, Daniel, was troubled in my spirit, and the visions that passed through my mind disturbed me. I approached one of those standing there and asked him the meaning of all this. So he told me and gave me the interpretation of these things. The four great beasts are four kings that will rise from the earth, but the holy people of the Most High will receive the kingdom and will possess it forever. Yes, forever and ever. Then I wanted to know the meaning of the fourth beast, which was different from all the others and most terrifying. With its iron teeth and bronze claws, the beast that crushed and devoured its victims and trampled underfoot whatever was left. I also wanted to know about the 10 horns on its head and about the other horn that came up, before which 3 of them fell. The horn that looked more imposing than the others, and that had eyes and a mouth that spoke boastfully. As I watched, this horn was waging war against the holy people and defeating them, until the Ancient of Days came and pronounced judgment in favor of the holy people of the Most High, and the time came when they possessed the kingdom. He gave me this explanation. The fourth beast is a fourth kingdom that will appear on the earth. It will be different from all the other kingdoms and will devour the whole earth, trampling it down and crushing it. The 10 horns and the 10 kings who will come from this kingdom, after them, another king will arise, different from the earlier ones. He will subdue 3 kings. He will speak against the Most High and oppress the holy people and try to change the set times and the laws. The holy people will be delivered into his hands for a time, times, and half a time. But the court will sit, and his power will be taken away and completely destroyed forever. Then the sovereignty, power, and greatness of all the kingdoms under heaven will be handed over to the holy people of the Most High. His kingdom will be an everlasting kingdom, and all rulers will worship and obey him. This is the end of the matter. I, Daniel, was deeply troubled by my thoughts, and my face turned pale, but I kept the matter to myself. Amen.
You and the thing here. So I'm gonna read the excerpts of chapter 7 and then chapter 7 here and then chapter 11 and 12, just because of the sake of time. So Good Daniel is a very good book. But this I forgot that this book has a lot of consistency to it. So obviously definitely read the book of Daniel here. So here Daniel goes into vision, right? The revelation was given in a dream through visions, or referring to experience a dream. Daniel insisted the unity of revelation and referring to visions. He emphasized the 5 successful stages of revelation was given. Daniel had been an interpreter of 2 dreams, and then his statesman became the recipient of 4 dreams or visions. But really, I want to get into the Son of Man here. In the 3rd portion of the vision, Daniel saw the Son of Man approaching the Ancient of Days. Approaching the Ancient of Days here. There, when the Son of Man was brought into the presence of the Ancient Day, all the authority, glory, and sovereign power been exercised by the rulers in the 4th kingdom. All people, nations, and men of every language was conferred on him, and those people worship him. This is in keeping with the Father's promise to the Son in Psalms 2:6-9. The Son of Man will be establishing an everlasting dominion or kingdom. That kingdom will never be conquered by another. His reign will be established on earth in the expiration of 1,000 years of the Lord's millennial reign. He will surrender the kingdom to God the Father, after which Christ will be appointed as ruler over God's eternal kingdom forever. And then you see Daniel is served by the 4 beasts. The 4 beasts represent 4 kingdoms, as stated earlier. Babylon represented by a lion. The Medes and Greeks, you see this Greece here, Rome. You see the Roman Empire. And the promise to Israel after the destruction of the 4 beasts, the saints will receive the kingdom. And the assisting of the church age was nowhere else revealed, but the nation of Israel had been times of Gentiles. Daniel was told it would rise over the land of Israel. The details of the 4 beasts, there will be like a second beast, so come a little horn, refers to the Antichrist. Much later, a horn will raise to do 3 kings. And then it will slowly move by God and usually trouble. And you see that here. So vision chapter 11 to 12. You see the 70 weeks here. Confess the sins, there's a petition. You see the Messiah on here, but I definitely want to, the program is 70 weeks. You see this. Also here, I do want to bring this, the Messiah. You see the same is true with 90 days. 70 days, the 490 required to complete 7 Sabbaths, with one occurring every 7 years. But they never let land to rest. So he gave 490 years for the Sabbaths to be fulfilled. The 3 provided work in Christ, but 6 will be realized by Israel in the second advent. And then God will atone for wickedness, a kapar. Kapar means to cover or expedite. This was to reveal to God's final atonement of Israel when she repents the second coming. In the division of 70 weeks, you see this current relation we talked about 483 or 365, 476, and it equals the same number of days. Chapter 11. Okay, so here you see Israel's under second and third empires. I think we talked about this. Yeah, so we're going to do chapter 12 now. Okay, so you see the Roman Empire, he moved to Egypt, and then so you see here they will attack. Okay, then the Antichrist. So the king. So here, so with Roman Empire, it's in the time of Christ, but in a later time, this coming king will be independent of any authority from himself. He would do what he pleases, right? He also take himself absolute power in the religious realm, magnify himself above God, defining and speaking blasphemy against the gods of gods. He opposes and exalts himself everything that's called God and is worship. You will be restored to worship him as God, as miracles by the false prophet. Creation of God's kingdom, 3.5 years. Because of the reference to the gods and his fathers, the God of Abraham. He will set aside all organized religion and set himself as the sole object of worship. Instead, by the power of by power, he would demand worship. The fact that one desirable by women suggests he incites the Messiah, hope of Israel. The Antichrist will honor God of fortress, his political and religious powers, and he will be given strength maybe by Satan. He will not hesitate to use military power, and his ability to circumvent the false prophet will perform in his favor. Verse 45, there it says the second half of the 77 years is an attack. The king of the south will attack Israel. King will attack Israel. And then it says here the Antichrist will hear alarming reports from the east. There's very many invaders posing as Christ, and Christ's headquarters in Jerusalem, which Christ will rule the world in the millennium. And then the personal appearance of Jesus Christ to earth. Note that when Revelation contained chapter 12 was given Daniel, he was concerned about his people's destiny. Now, the conclusion of the vision, the angel consults Daniel by revealing two facts. First, the people of Israel, your people, will be delivered by intervention. Michael, the angelic angel, who is Israel's defender in the Great Tribulation, will attempt to exterminate every descendant of Abraham. This would be a time of great perceived distress for Israel. The deliverance of Israel, Daniel's people, refers not to individual salvation, that of Brennan would say, but rather to national deliverance for the Gentiles. The second fact that the consolation Daniel has promised those who will sleep will be the resurrection. Many Jews who lose their lives at the hands of Gentiles in events revealed in chapter 11 to sleep in the dust of the earth. Does not mean unconscious sickness and death, but simply means that that person appears to be asleep. The body asleep is not the soul. Unbelieving Jews will be resurrected to shame or everlasting contentment, will not be partake in the covenantal blessing. Jews, however, who believe in the Messiah will be resurrected to everlasting life and to possession in Christ, will shine the brightness of heaven. They will be wise. The message God remembers covenant will fulfill all promises to Israel and will be consolation that will turn cause them to lead others on here. No righteousness of God ever goes unrewarded, so whoever is faithful under persecution will shine like stars forever. And then resurrection of believers, martyr in the tribulation, second coming came to life and reign with Christ. Unbelieving dead, however, will be resurrected to everlasting at the end of 1,000 years. Understandably, Daniel and his media readers could not comprehend all the details given in this book. Not until history continued to unfold, many would not be able to understand these prophetic revelations. People today looking back over history can see the specific how much Daniel predicted in the time at the end. Words of this book have been kept sealed, kept intact, being understood by many who gain knowledge from it. This will be in the tribulation. Even though Daniel people may not fully understand these books, they were sure they will deliver Israel from Gentiles on here. So questions considering the Great Tribulation. This session includes 2 requests, 2 angelic response. One of the angels across the thing was standing by Gabriel. How long would it be before these things are preferred to the Israel's final compensation? Gabriel gave time and times and time and a half. 3.5 years. Thought of the final ruler would be reigning for 7. The first half will be the current peace for Israel. They'll be enjoying the benefits of covenant this king will make with them. Israel will be a land of wailing villages and wild walls and wild gates. As they're destroying these 2 armies, he will reign. Israel's power will be broken ruthlessly. Power at the end of tribulation. Then Daniel addressed a question to Gabriel, whom he called my Lord. Daniel asked, what will be the outcome for all this? He wanted to be God's program for Israel beyond tribulation period. Little information about Israel's blessing in the millennium reign. Thought if he did not know that God's eternal kingdom would be established, the saints will possess and rule in that kingdom. Many such prophecies have been given through prophets, more be given through prophets who are yet not to come. As the angel restated, the words are to be closed up and sealed. Also noted that in that period time, many Jews would turn to the Savior, and what God had revealed to Daniel will continue to be asserted to them and will understand. The angel said that 1,290 days will be measured off from the time the daily sacrifice is abolished. He will put an end to sacrifice. He will cause its installation on the wing in the last half, 30 days. His 30 days will stand beyond the end of tribulation, allowing for judgment of Israel and judgment of the nation. 30 days before the middle and made 30 days on here. So verses 12, 13, blessings pronounced those who wait and forever lives for 45 days. Additional 45 days after the end of tribulation, Israel waits. We realize that this will mark the blessing of the millennium, or maybe the period in the heavens, will descend to the earth, touching us for believers. Christ's coming is a blessing. Daniel did not see many of his prophecy fulfilled. He said, "It will rest as in death. He will be resurrected and will rise at the end of the days. He will receive his allotted inheritance, the millennium." Because Daniel's faith in God, he led a life of faithful service. All will be like Daniel, trust in the Lord and blessing of his millennial kingdom. Okay, so that's so we'll do the review questions in a moment. Let's go in class. Right here we're in week 11, and I'm going to go over the review question. It's just 5 simple review questions here. What does Daniel mean? What does Daniel name mean? It means my God is my judge. Elohim, and then judgment. There. Were Daniel and his friend renamed after the Babylonian gods? The answer is true. Yes, they were named after Babylonian gods. Shadrach are all named after the Bel, the god of Bel, or Babylonian gods in general. According to our textbook, who is the Son of Man? That's Jesus. True or false? According to Daniel 9:25-26, would the coming Messiah be cut off? That's true. Was Daniel a prophet? That's true. He was a prophet. Even though he was listening to writings, Daniel himself was a prophet, but maybe not in the way Jeremiah and Ezekiel's ministry was, but he was considered a prophet according to Jesus Christ. So just going back to here, what does Daniel mean? It means my God, God is my judge. Daniel and his friends were named after Babylonian gods. And then according to our textbook, who is the Son of Man? That's Jesus. And true, the Messiah will be cut off, and Daniel was a prophet. Have a great day, guys. Thank you for your class, and this concludes our major prophets class. Thank you so much. Bye.